Three, two, one.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, granitegrok.com. We are your feared extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from granitegrok.com.
Grok Talk.
All right, welcome to the Facebook Live teaser for this week's podcast. I predicted that Corey Lewandowski would announce a U.S. Senate run for President Trump's rally from his rally in Manchester. Didn't happen. It was discussed. President Trump did bring it up, but he didn't formally announce that. The Democrats think he's running. Everybody else thinks he's running. We're going to talk about that. Vice President Mike Pence spoke at the American Legion National Convention, and he had some news for the folks at the Manchester VA regarding faith and the Bible. We'll have a little conversation about that topic. New Hampshire Democrats' terrible, awful, bloated New Hampshire budget will be transformational for education spending, not education. We'll discuss that in the latest news, including the crybabies in Claremont. From the left side of the First in the Nation primary, we'll talk about how billionaire Tom Steyer has recorded what I believe to be the worst polling numbers for dollars spent. And Kristen, I'm a horrible candidate Gillibrand, has dropped out. We also have Joe Biden, who is in New Hampshire to tell a war story that was completely made up. International news, Brexit news. Boris has suspended Parliament with the permission of the Queen, and the Remain folks are very uppity about it. We'll get into that. We'll also have some updates from the homepage of granitegrok.com, a review of this week's Grok meet in Guilford, New Hampshire, and pretty much whatever else we can think of. Oh, we were on the Jim Lawrence show this week. We'll see if we can squeeze some of that in. Don't forget to check the calendar in the sidebar of our homepage and see where we'll be. And remember to share and like our content as we chase WMUR for New Hampshire internet dominance. And for the folks watching the podcast teaser on Facebook Live, look for the complete podcast on Saturday morning. We are ready to rock and roll, gentlemen. We have all these wonderful things to talk about. I'm learning how to use this Facebook Live thing. I think it's cool. I think we should do it. I really think we have an opportunity to use, I think John DePietro streams his Zoom meetings to a closed group on Facebook, and I think we could do the same thing to our closed Granite Grok group on Facebook, and I thought that would be kind of neat.
We should also try doing our live streams at events to Facebook Live, because there is the capability of doing that.
All right, so our first topic is Mr. Lewandowski, who has been teasing the idea of running for the U.S. Senate. Skip, you had some news that you ran into about that. Why don't you start there?
I did. I was over at New Hampshire Journal, and I guess Mike Graham talked with Corey, and Corey's still teasing things. He's still not making the final determination just yet, but I think he's having a lot of fun doing the teasing. And so far it's just building a little bit of anticipation. I think on every political person here in New Hampshire. Is he in or is he out? Is he in, out, in, out, in, out? Meanwhile, I think he's driving all the other candidates nuts, trying to figure out what it is that they're going to have to do to successfully compete against him. And as I have said to a couple of them, it's kind of hard to say that you are the Trump supporter when Corey flies in on Air Force One. So we'll see how that all plays out. It's going to be rather interesting. Is it possible to beat Corey? Yeah. That's why we play the game, because sometimes those that seem to have a lock on the race lose, sort of like Bill Binney did a couple of cycles ago when he ran for U.S. Senate, and all he ended up doing was spending about $461 for every single vote that he got, which meant that he lost.
Hey, you mentioned something, or I thought I saw something in the link you sent me about the Democrats having an ad against Corey. Did I read that right?
They do. It's hilarious. They're already painting him as who's the biggest swamp creature in D.C. Just the basic premise of it is ludicrous. But they also assembled the ad so fast they didn't have time to actually buy the background graphics, so all the watermarks are in there. So
in other words, they're a bunch of amateurs. You can leave out the word lovable.
Not lovable, but I wouldn't say that they were too much in a rush, not amateurs, to get their ideology out there. the fact that they've done this and they haven't done it for the other candidates thus far kind of shows you who they really fear.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely afraid of him because he can bring Shaheen-level money to this race.
Oh, more than that. Plus, I think that people here in New Hampshire, they're going to see him as a political infighter that would, on the idea of a Trump. Trump has not backed down from a fight. He's taken on all comers. And it's been, as I sit back and have watched the antics going on over the last couple of years, he is crazy like a fox. Throw me in that briar patch, because what he has done to what Trump has done to his political enemies is just nothing short of genius.
Absolutely. Defending the indefensible, and Nancy Pelosi is forced to do it every day thanks to Trump.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so let's take a little quick poll. Is Corey in? I say yes.
Yes.
No.
You don't think he's running?
Really?
I don't think so. It's a weird way to go about it, unless he really thinks he's got so much name recognition he can drop in at the last minute and still blow off the other guys.
Okay.
Well, he's getting the name recognition from everybody else.
I mean, I like Corey, but I got to tell you, of the people running for Senate, I think a calm and measured person like Bill O'Brien, who speaks softly but carries a giant constitutional stick, is more the kind of person we need.
Well, that's not the question. The question isn't whether or not Bill's the best candidate. We just sat down and spent 2 hours with him. He answered all the questions very well for us in our Grok Gauntlet. I think he did a great job. He came up with some answers I didn't expect that were good answers. And that's still not the question. The question isn't who the best candidate is. The question is Corey going to run? And I think he is. And I get your reasoning. It does make some sense. I just disagree. See that? Look, we've disagreed. Groksters have disagreed about something. Imagine that it actually happens.
Of course we do. I like Corey. I just don't think this would be the right cycle for him to run for Senate, and I'm not surprised he's hedging.
Well,
I think you're wrong, because if anything, given the atmosphere that Trump has created, I think this would be the time for Corey to do exactly what he is known for being, which is very feisty and not backing down. It's gotten him into trouble in more genteel environments. And,
it has.
It has. And people didn't like it, which is why, Jughead called him a thug, Judd Gregg. And because he doesn't fit into that country club GOP establishment mold. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, I'm done with that mold. How well has it worked for us lately here in New Hampshire? Not well at all.
Well, the country club doesn't work well at all. We'll all remember the picture of the horse and its ass when one of the state groups was trying to pick a leader, the black horse and the gray-haired guy. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, and we Red Hatters were the ones that did them in.
All right. So I think we've milked that cow for now. Ladies and gentlemen, we have two different options for you in the Corey Lewandowski announces race, but we're going to move on to something else. Vice President Mike Pence, who is a fine gentleman, spoke at the American Legion National Convention, and he had some thoughts about a controversy going on in Manchester. Skip, why don't you let people know what the controversy is and what he said?
Yeah, there's been a big kerfuffle here in New Hampshire about the POW table that sits in the lobby. And there have been a number of religious articles. Sam, oh yeah, you go ahead and drink the beer and mute yourself. And there's been a big kerfuffle, which is a proxy of what's going on here in the entire culture war that we see. Is it freedom from a government establishment of religion, or is it freedom from religion altogether? And Mikey Weinstein of the Freedom from Religion Foundation up in Michigan has made all kinds of claims to get rid of any single piece of religious paraphernalia on government property, thinking that any little bit is an establishment of religion. And to his credit, Pence today said that, no, the Bible is going to stay. It was given as a gift. It is somebody's Bible. It is not the government's Bible. It is in respect to those prisoners of war, to those people who fought for this country and never came back, by those who have actually fought in those same wars. And I think it's a case like with the cross that was out in California and a couple other places. People are just trying to, it's part of the, I would say, the Confederacy statute takeaways. Erase our history, erase our foundation so that the country can be remade in their own image. And I think Pence has done the right thing. Now this Mikey Weinstein went on a tirade, and I'm looking at all the tabs I got open, and I've got to find the right one, and I'll read you the quote. But that's, the, if you don't mind the pun, that's setting the table for the rest of this discussion.
Well, it certainly is. I think you know, as we've said repeatedly in writing and in person, that most of these people, the Fred Linds of the world, the separation of church and state folks, they seem to think that the First Amendment says that there shouldn't be any religion. And of course, that's not what it means. The Supreme Court has agreed numerous times. And it would take a case like this to get there to perhaps make that point yet again. Not that it would stop them. They're very persistent about making sure that they scrub religion from everything. But, you know, that's pretty much been the socialist progressive mantra. The entire education system, if you go back and even into the early 1800s, some of the earliest folks who favored public school saw it as an opportunity to begin to separate education from religion and to make a more irreligious society. And then you get into the 1900s and you've got, you know, the Manns and the Deweys and what we have now for an education system. And you know, we just posted something from Cornerstone this week about your religious rights in school and the rights of students to remind parents that you're going to get pushback, but there are people to help you and you are not wrong.
Right. So here's what good old Mikey said about Pence's remarks, calling the vice president one of the most repulsive and repellent fundamentalist Christian supremacists and bullies on the scene today. It is hardly surprising that he is lending his ugly bigotry and pervasive prejudice in support of keeping that Christian Bible bolted down on that POW MIA table at the Manchester, New Hampshire VA Medical Center. This is just a further perpetuation of fundamentalist Christian privilege. Gosh, can you get any more Democrat talking points into 3 sentences than that? Privilege,
that is incredible. And all of us that have met Mike Pence know that he is absolutely a wonderful gentleman, not a bigot of any sort, but he is firm about his religious beliefs. And everybody in this country has the right to their religious beliefs, including those in government. And never forget that the founders said that the Constitution is designed for a good and moral people and is wholly unsuitable for any other. And the Democrats are not good and moral people. You want to talk about bigotry, that guy must have been looking in the mirror when he was composing those sentences.
I tend to agree, but the amount of vitriol is just unbelievable because, and again, it's showing how they're trying to change the culture. What used to be good, you know, a fine, upstanding, Bible-believing, God-fearing person trying to live a good life, and by all means, as you said, Mike, is doing exactly that, is turned out to be a bigot. Well, we all know where the bigot comes from, that if you are for traditional marriage and not for same-sex marriage or any of the other LGBTQRSTUV practices, you are a bigot. How dare you judge me? Well, I'm sorry, but, you know, my mind is not that open that all my brains fall out. And at some point, we do have to make judgment values. And I can think of any one of them that I would make that would push back on him. But really, pervasive prejudice, ugly bigotry, I'm having a discussion over at Tree Hugger once again, and how they look down their noses at us in rural areas, that we don't share the same values as these new urbanists, and they hate us. And one of them finally said, look, this is the reason why you got Trump, because you hate us. and I piled in on that, obviously. And if you're not going to respect everybody else, that only your views count, well, that's how you get Trump and Pence and a lot of people who vote for them, and that's not good. It really is a case where I think he's worn out his welcome, except within his own coven of militant atheists.
Sorry, I was talking to my wife.
I think.
Go ahead.
You have to pay attention to your wife.
I do. That's why I did that. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. I mean, atheists, people who should go along to get along, and no interest in religion, and that's fine. We won't push it down their throats. Instead, they have their militant, you shall not have religion views, and they want to push that down our throats, along with all the appendages associated with their peculiar lifestyles.
And it really is. It comes down to what is the public morality. And we all know at Granite Rock, it's the laws that are passed reflect the public morality. And that everybody has the same chance to inject their morality into those public laws. It's the left that says, how dare you even challenge our viewpoint of what morality should be? And that's how we get drag queens at story hour at at libraries, yep. Or you get free needle exchanges for drug addicts. I mean, bit by bit, brick by brick, the former stigmas that kept the wall of society up and healthy have been withdrawn. And at some point, that society is going to fall from within. Mike, you had it right. Ours is only for amoral people. Well, when you become amoral or moral to the point that anything goes, which is, again, amoral, I can't see how we can keep it. It is moving us to that everything, well, we're already there. Everything is politicized, and no longer left to just civil society stigmas that have shown to work over thousands of years that are supposed to be the main controllers.
And everything is relative. I mean, how dare you judge me, they say. But they insist on judging us just for trying to go about our lives, not for trying to interfere with theirs.
And that's why I always bring up the woman at the well, because at the very end of that parable, which the left often brings up, I have to point out where Jesus said to that woman, "Go and sin no more." There was judgment.
Some of the content on this program is shared under the fair use provision of U.S. copyright law, found free in the public domain, or covered under Attribution 3.0. Some of the music on this program is provided by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Skip at another great topic, and I want to get right to it because we may end up spending a lot of time on it. I don't know. The New Hampshire Democrats' terrible, awful, bloated budget, which we've talked about repeatedly. Well, now, of course, the education whiners are complaining about the budget and the money, and oh my God. And of course, Claremont's involved because whenever you talk about money and education in New Hampshire, you have to talk about Claremont.
Yeah, or in this case, Berlin, who was there in full force. I did not I was there for a 9 a.m. presser. For those municipal leaders that think that Sununu's veto was the right thing to do. One of them specifically talked about, and the video is up on Granite Rock already, by the way. I'm there on the far right side, exactly where I should be in the frame, about the structural deficit that the Democrats are trying to put into the budget once again, just like when Bill O'Brien, just before he assumed the speakership, they did it back then again. They think they can get away with it now. But outside the legislative office building was a rather good-sized demonstration, rather peaceful, just a little bit of chanting, but lots of signs. And, I look at how much people want other people's money. That's really what it comes down to. You strip away everything else that's being talked about. It's almost like they are absolutely willing to have a completely state-funded education system in place like they do in other states. They no longer care about New Hampshire's traditions, New Hampshire's advantage. and are basically saying, let's get rid of even the veneer of what local control is in our school districts at this point. All they care about is the money, as our fellow Groxer Ian Underwood keeps putting out there. They care about the money. They don't care about what that money is supposed to be doing, which is student achievement. And when you look around the state, the budgets go up, the enrollments go down, and the actual results of the students, as noted by standardized tests, are either just the same or going down. In my town, we are now up to $23,000 per student. Our achievement levels haven't budged a whisker over the last 10 years. We might as well just send them to the local private school and be done with it, and turn all of the buildings, well, let's turn it into housing for the poor. After all, that's what they all want to do.
And related to that, Skip, you sent a link from the Concord Monitor in an AP piece by Holly Raymer, and this pretty much sums it up. Speaking at a public hearing, Claremont School Board Chairman Frank Sprague told lawmakers that the increased education funding would have been transformational for his city, and he's angry that it remains in limbo. So as I led into in the Facebook Live introduction and also in the introduction to the topic, the only thing transformational about education funding is what it does to everybody who has to pay for it and what they get for it, which is nothing.
Because education departments, whether they be town, county, or state, are in fact a big business, and it's the administrators in particular and the principals, and then of course all the union lackeys and featherbedders that are part of the whole heap, because the tooth to tail ratio, as Skip is fond of speaking about, in fact is always poor and is getting poorer. Long ago, when we remember a principal, a vice principal, and one or two secretaries, and a janitor somewhere, and everybody else was teaching. And the principal and the vice principal were teaching about half the time, too. Now there's a vast administrative staff, there's diversity specialists, there's every kind of hanger-on known to man and woman and others. And we have to pay for all those, but the amount of money being spent on the kids is not even keeping pace with inflation.
No, as I'm a budget committee member here in town, I watch how much is going to payroll, and I see how little of that entire expense is going into things like textbooks or science experiments or the things that the students actually have to put their hands on, other than technology. Technology is taking a bigger and bigger bite, and yeah, you can do a lot more of it, as we all know. But it's about as socialist an endeavor as we see here in the United States, other than the Veterans Administration, hospital care, which really is socialized medicine, since they own the means of production. School systems want to continue, the government school systems they brook no dissent and do not want any change to their status quo since the warehouse system started back in the late 1890s.
Well, we have to thank the Germans and the Marxists, which in some cases are the same thing, for our education system. Decimal to dot the I's and cross the T's.
Well, you're absolutely right. Our intellectuals at the time, so-called, went over to Germany because that's where the best schools were at that time in history, and they brought back this marvelous system. And up until, I'd say, the mid-'60s, it worked pretty well because the unions really hadn't gotten their claws into it. Then the new left got in. They said, here's how we can start the social engineering. And here's where most of us can stay employed for quite some time, because a lot of these kids can't make change at the grocery store or the convenience store.
All right, and we have a whole bunch of Democrats wandering around New Hampshire who love that idea. And they come here and they say crazy things and do crazy things, and we report about it. One of them has stopped doing that. Kirsten Gillibrand, or Gillibrand, I guess it's pronounced, has announced yesterday afternoon that she has done her completely useless, pointless campaign that only made her look bad, not just as a candidate for president, but as a sitting U.S. senator, has come to an end, and she's done. So she won't be coming back to visit us anytime soon. Joe Biden, however, was here recently, and he was in Hanover. And he had some
But
interesting.
was he really in New Hampshire?
Well, earlier in the week he thought he was in Vermont. He may or may not know where he was, but the Washington Post says he was in Hanover. And Chris Maidment, who writes for us at Monadnock Grok, shared the story. Joe Biden painted a vivid scene for the 400 people packed into a college meeting hall. A four-star general had asked the then vice president to travel to Kunar province in Afghanistan, a dangerous foray into godforsaken country, to recognize the remarkable heroism of a Navy captain. Some told him it was too risky. Biden said he brushed off their concerns. We can lose a vice president, he said. We can't lose many more of these kids. Not a joke. The Navy captain, Biden recalled Friday night, had rappelled down a 60-foot ravine under fire and retrieved the body of an American comrade, carrying him on his back. Now the general wanted Biden to pin a silver star on the American hero who, despite his bravery, felt like a failure. He said, "Sir, I don't want the damn thing," Biden said, his jaw clenched and his voice rising to a shout. "Do not pin it on me, sir. Please, sir, do not do that. He died. He died." "This is the God's truth," Biden had said as he told the story. "My word as a Biden." Well, apparently, except for the fact that almost all of it was false. It's his word as a Biden, which isn't worth very much. He pretty much made it all up. And the Washington Post said Biden's war story almost entirely false. So this is their front runner. This is the guy. He's the safe pick, apparently, and that's what passes for safe in the Democrat Party right now. We can go on. We can talk about that in a minute, but before we do, I just wanted to point out that an unsafe pick is a guy who thinks he is a safe pick. Billionaire Tom Steyer is not going to be on the stage in September at the Democrat debate because his polling and his donor numbers don't fit the profile that the party has set up that require you to meet them. And of course, most of the money comes out of his pocket. He's a billionaire. He can. That's fine. You can fund your own campaign. But the DNC wants to see so many donors in 20 different states and small dollar donors and all that sort of thing. And he can probably come up with that. But he says he has the polling numbers. And sadly, there isn't any evidence of that. His overall RCP average is 0.4%. Now, the reason this is stunning is because if you've turned on anything that's connected to the internet or a television lately, you've probably seen a Tom Steyer ad. He spent millions of dollars on YouTube ads, on streaming service ads, on TV ads. He's everywhere. RCP average, 0.4%. He's 1% in CNN's poll last week. Quinnipiac has him at 1%. The best he possibly does is an Economist YouGov poll, and that's 5% of the respondents who consider, they even know who he is. He's basically spent all this money for name recognition, and nobody cares. I wrote about it a couple weeks ago. He's pissing off millennials. They're so sick of his ads interrupting their online content that they don't even care anymore who he is or what he has to say, and he's basically bought himself obscurity.
And you would think that after, 2 or 3 years of his next-gen operation trying to get millennials to sign up on college campuses would have helped him in some manner.
Well, he did succeed in New Hampshire. He pretty much bought the election here in 2018. His college students went out and turned out the vote. And as you know, mathematically, we lost 3 or 4 Senate seats easily because of a handful of votes, and they're almost certainly from college students.
Right, but from the idea that it was his organization doing it, prepping for now, it was a disaster. By the way, just as a technical point, Mike?
Hello, yes.
You need a flashlight. You're fading into darkness there.
It's getting darker in here, yes. I got to get more lights in here.
Yep.
He's in the sun. He looks good. He's shady.
Yeah, well, thinking of shady characters.
Speaking of shady, let's talk about some shady business over in England, which actually was kind of cool, if you ask me, Mike.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's the old saying, the people don't like the government, we should maybe change the people. And in this case, if the Prime Minister and the Parliament don't agree with each other, let's change the Parliament. Well, there's been a 3-year battle, and that's not counting the run-up to the referendum in 2016 over Brexit. The simple fact of the British people, well over 50% of them, wanting to determine their own fate and not have to swallow ugly European food, along with even uglier European regulations, which are turned into the force of British law mandatorily due to their membership. Not to mention that the British people pay far more into Europe than they get out of it, and they're forced to suffer the tail end of Angela Merkel's migration experiment, pulling in all those poor people from the Middle East. So generally speaking, there was a high degree of motivation to get the hell out, and it passed in June 2016. But as usual, the global elites didn't want that. And those are in all kinds of places. They're in the ministries, that's the equivalent to the cabinet departments. They're in the parliament. They're in the backbenches of the ruling party. What? Disagreeable factions? Why not? And of course, they're in the business sphere, the global business types that think that they'll lose some sort of grip on the global economy if Britain leaves Europe. There's no actual basis in fact for that. London has been a global financial hub for long before the European Union existed, and will be again long after it has ceased to exist. There's a squad of backbenchers which is called the Gawkwood Squad, because one of the guys is actually called Gawk, believe it or not. But these guys were essentially plotting to pass a law that would make it impossible to leave the European Union, and especially not to stare the check-coated bad car salesman in the eye and say, I don't want your deal, I'm leaving. And that is what Boris is planning to do. If he can't get a deal that's agreeable, he's going to leave without one. And the deadline is the end of October. In the meantime, Parliament's just coming back from its recess, and then there are party conferences to be held in early October, and there are European meetings to be held in the middle of October. And what Boris has said is he's going to effectively suspend Parliament from now until the time that it comes to actually hit the deadline and leave the European Union. And the Queen's speech, I think, has been postponed. The Chancellor's budget speech has been postponed, and he's asked the Queen to prorogue Parliament. And since it's a bunch of rogues, I think that's a beautiful word for it. And the backbenchers that were hoping to derail his Brexit efforts are as mad as hell and calling it a constitutional crisis and all of those things. Notwithstanding that Parliament is occasionally suspended, such as pending an election, but the fact that he got the Queen to agree to this has his enemies all in a tizzy. And it's kind of wonderful. But as I say, proroguing the rogues is what I call it. They have been suspended.
Since we're not from there, does it sound like the Queen wants out? I mean, she's apolitical. Technically, she's not supposed to pick sides, but this kind of seems like she's sending a message.
There are very few things that the monarch can actually do these days. They are obviously the titular head of government, not the de facto one. They present the king or queen's speech at the opening of a parliamentary session to lay out the government's plans. So my government will, which is basically a list of policy proposals. She can dissolve Parliament. That's a wonderful thought, isn't it? No caustic substances are used. She can dissolve Parliament and enforce an election. Normally, that's done at the request of the Prime Minister. And the weird thing about the British parliamentary democracy is that the Prime Minister can choose any time up to 5 years after an election when to hold the next one. They can effectively wait until some of their policies are looking good and call an election when they're in the best possible position to win a few seats. That's not a bad deal. And then there's the Queen or King can also withhold royal assent in a similar way to bills that get signed by the president or things that become law without being signed. We have the same kind of thing in England. Again, the monarch almost never intervenes, but the monarch can refuse assent to a bill. When that happens, Parliament has to pass it and pass it again. And I think they have to pass it a third time before it overrides the effective veto. So there are a few things they can do. But in this case, one of the powers is to suspend Parliament for a period for a good reason. And Boris has convinced her. Whether she's pro-Brexit, hell, if you're about British sovereignty and you're the sovereign, who wouldn't be for Brexit? But she's not saying that because, she's very reserved and inscrutable.
All right, that's awesome. I think that's probably the best analysis we're going to get in the state of New Hampshire on that topic.
And just to note, the international, the globalists and the financiers all want to scare the hell out of the British people that Brexit is going to hurt them. So in round one, the commie Canadian governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who is a Canadian and is a socialist, decided that, hey, you're going to have an exit. The economy is going to tank. I'm going to lower the pound against other currencies to make sure we don't have a recession. And they knocked 20% off its value overnight. And it didn't really ever recover from that. Lo and behold, along comes the election of Boris, and it looks like Brexit may get revived, and the pound tanks by maybe 10%. And then it turns out there's a Project Yellowhammer going on in all of the ministries, which is essentially an opposition research project to find all the worst possible outcomes to scare the pants off the British people that this is going to be a bad idea. And then along comes Boris anyway, and he goes to the Queen, and he gets Parliament prorogued, and sure enough, the pound takes another hit, drops another couple of cents, because the global elites are scared that he might actually do it.
This is sounding like a government going rogue.
Yes, I think so.
They want a coup.
It's all attempts at a silent coup. And don't forget, they can put Boris to the test. They can call a vote of no confidence in Parliament, and if the vote of no confidence succeeds, effectively the government falls. This is something that happens in Italy about every 3 weeks. That's not entirely a joke. But if that happens, then there has to be an election. And I think Boris is preparing for a general election anyway. And if they don't force it on him, it may come to the point where he forces it on them and says, you know what, I got all my plans in place for Brexit. Do you really want to bow down to the Europeans and keep on paying and keep on taking those rules? Or are you with me? And then he hits the stump. 3 weeks, election's over, and he's hoping to come back with a bigger majority. The question is, who gets to force that? Who gets to pick the date? Because if there's a vote of no confidence, it's going to happen anyway.
Sounds like some Trumpian politics going on behind the scenes.
Right. But, I'll draw an analogy for the folks here that have watched parliamentary procedures. We all know that the Iran deal was illegal. It is not a treaty, and it was not ratified. But Obama managed to turn the Senate rules inside out by getting a couple of Republicans to go along and pass a law that effectively said, unless a majority voted against the deal would stand. That's not how it works. You have to have 2/3 for a deal to make it a treaty. And I think we have the same thing here. The backbenchers are trying to pass a bill in Parliament to make it illegal for Boris to carry out his duty. He's playing them at their own game. Does that sound like Trump?
That does. Good for him. Good for him.
Warning, this is not a safe space. I repeat, this is not a safe space.
I would be a lot less afraid of it if I just knew what it was called.
Let's call it Steve.
Steve?
It's a pretty name.
Steve sounds nice.
Yeah, I'm a lot less scared of Steve.
Oh, great and powerful Steve! What do you want?
I don't think you can speak.
Excellent.
Go!
Few quick points before we get on to our next subject. We will be at the Dublin area GOP, Skip and I, on September 4th. And then September 7th, we have a table at the Concord, New Hampshire Gun Show. All right, so a few other things that broke today. We've been talking about the horrible tragedy in Randolph where a drunk driver who should have had his license revoked swerved around and killed 7 bikers on a road in Randolph. The Massachusetts RMV, the Registry of Motor Vehicles, has found literally thousands of people that were backlogged that they should have had sent messages to have their licenses suspended in their own state and in other states to notify those states of their violations. New Hampshire, which of course is where the accident happened, and we've written a couple stories about it, discovered it had its own backlog and has sent out letters basically revoking or suspending 900 licenses. They began their investigation the same time, right after the accident, and we posted it this morning in New Hampshire, whereas at 13,912 notices of violations committed in New Hampshire by drivers from other states were sent out. Half of those notifications involved a suspension of driving privileges in the state of New Hampshire. 1,508 suspension notices were sent to New Hampshire residents because of state court defaults, with 1,433 notices going to non-residents. The governor says it's a different situation, mostly because nobody died, but as far as I'm concerned, that's really not the point. I had a lot of complaints about the Massachusetts system. You know, Massachusetts is obviously nearing the perfect state of liberal utopia. Their government is so big and I can't even think of the word to use. Incompetent and incapable of accomplishing anything efficiently, that it really has almost reached that state where elected officials are unimpeachable. You can't even get to them because there's all this junk in front of them. They have their own swamp. And New Hampshire has worked really hard not to have one. We do still have swamps in the state government. But it's always about the bureaucracy, and government's response to these problems is always, well, we need more people, we need to add more bodies, we need to have more money, we need to have this and that and the other thing. And of course, State Senator David Rising Waters, Democrat, New Hampshire State Senator, he's the chair of the Transportation Committee. He said, well, we're aware of staffing challenges at the DMV, but not the backlog. If there are staffing issues or laws that will compromise public safety, we'll look forward to working with the governor to address those. You know, his first response is staffing issues. I don't think it's staffing issues. There was a technology issue that was brought up that they think may have had something to do with the backlog in New Hampshire. But again, it's just this constant battle. And of course, the government, the education funding, we don't have enough money. We know it's going to go down a tube somewhere and it's not going to get to students, but they keep asking for it. The same thing's going to happen in a bureaucracy, and it's really a shame, and we're fortunate that nobody died because of it, but Massachusetts it did, and I'm sure it's happening in other states.
It's always a case where nobody really wants to take the blame. There are some people who will stand up and immediately resign, saying it was my fault, I'm going to get out of the way. In a lot of other cases, a scapegoat is found and made to fall on their sword. But, with Mr. Rising Waters, as you so called him, he's basically obscuring the real reason why the problems didn't get fixed. Somebody failed to be in charge. Somebody failed to take responsibility, and thus the process failed. It doesn't get any simpler than that. And you can't keep hiding behind technology unless you have some kind of hardware failure or a software design failure or an upgrade failure. When this thing's been running for years and years, it's a person failure. It's a case of holding up your thumb and saying, hey, does this look kind of okay? Yeah, does this smell okay in the grand scheme of things? And when it doesn't, or when it doesn't measure up, usually the problem is a person, not in a computer. And for Senator Waters to try to make it sound otherwise, oh, they're oppressed, they're victims over at the DMV. We haven't given them what they needed. We have to go over and help the poor waifs find their way again to do their jobs. Sorry, not buying it.
I mean, if government tells you that all their problems will be solved if you give them more money, they're lying. It never solves anything.
It's always the opposite. They're the only entity that we know of that when it fails, it gets more money.
Hey, Skip, we had a grok meet yesterday in Guilford. Did you notice that the minute you drove 2 minutes down the road, all the fog went away?
Yeah, and guess what? When I got to my house, it was there as well.
Well, you are on a side of a mountain. So, yeah, we had a grok meet up in Guilford, first one we've had that far north. Horrible weather, raining like crazy, hard to see, got dark, and we had a really good turnout, wouldn't you say?
We did. We had probably 8 new people show up that have never been to a grok meetup before. It was a little more subdued than what we have had in the past. I recall some of the Murphy tap rooms getting rather boisterous as we kind of split off into smaller groups, and we all had to talk a little bit louder and louder and louder to hear ourselves. But it was a good time. I'm glad to see that a number of people showed up that I didn't expect. Plenty of food. I'm sorry I lost the chili cook-off to Norm. I guess mine was just too spicy, although I noticed that a lot of mine was gone by the end of the evening anyways.
I should have brought some. I completely forgot about the cook-off. I would have made chili, but I didn't.
I bought way too much food.
You did.
Let's put this: we're going to be eating leftovers for a while.
Even Marmar said, "Nope, you got enough food."
Yeah. The grok bank account's looking at me like, "You did what?"
Yeah, spent a lot of money on food.
But it would have been a great venue tonight or the night before, because I touted in the announcement. You cannot get a better view of Lake Winnipesaukee than from Norm's house. So hopefully, before he sells it, we're going to try again and be able to show the wide experience, because it really is gorgeous.
So we also had another unusual thing this week that we did. We spent 2 hours with Jim Lawrence down in Nashua on the Jim Lawrence Show. I have posted some of that audio already, but we'll have a bit more of it. That was kind of a fun experience, wasn't it?
It was. I haven't been able to do things like that for quite some number of years now. So it was great to be able to sit in the saddle, get close to the mic, and just yak away. And I'm hoping to be able to do more of that. As I have expressed recently to the other Groksters, all of a sudden organizations that in the past wouldn't even give us the time of day are all asking us to come talk at their meetings. So, this is a great turn of events, and I am looking forward to it. I'm thinking that once again, as we have talked about before, we're filling a marketplace that has been abandoned. So we're happy to go talk. We're happy to tell people what we think about any topic that they want. So it'll be fun. And yes, with Jim Lawrence, it was a lot of fun. We started on topics that I didn't think that we'd start off with, given that we're tied here to New Hampshire. We're talking about Europe and the Middle East and all kinds of, and South America. It's like out of our bailiwick. But I think we did a credible job.
I'd agree. I think we did fine. It was fun. I'm glad Ellen called in and could join us for the second hour. We needed another voice in there, and it would have been nice. I don't know who else was supposed to show up. I think you said Norm thought he might come down.
I kind of thought it might even turn out to be just Norm, myself, and
a lot of sandwiches.
Way too many sandwiches, and it would have just been the three of us. Then a couple of our readers said that they were going to join. So, but I thought, 5 or 6 people. We ended up with close to 20, which was nice. A little less than some other places, but given how far north we were, I'm pleased, and I'm quite sure that we'll be able to do better next time.
That's actually pretty impressive.
It was.
And private house up north, 20 people. That's good.
We have a couple more coming up. Where are we next month?
Next month, we're supposed to be in Wyndham. We're going to be hosted by our nascent Wyndham Grok folks, as long as that gets pulled off. After that, we're going back out to Keene in October, back to Manchester in November, and then I got to do the whole schedule up once again. But I'm going to try to stick to once a month, at least through November. We'll probably skip December for obvious reasons, and then start back in the middle of January. And at that point, I'm hoping to have gotten a place out in the Seacoast area that we can all meet. So far, I am zipped for just too many places thus far. I mentioned that, okay, Granite Rock, we're a conservative group. We're looking to, meet up. This is what we do. and I never hear back.
Well, you made some contacts in Rochester last night and came up with a few more names of people we can reach out to and see where we can go out there. There's got to be places to go. I mean, Rochester 912 does events out there all the time. Obviously, Diane Bitter knows every nook and cranny where you can cram 2 or more people in the entire Seacoast area where they might accept us. So she probably has a list she could provide if we just ask her for it, which I will. And maybe we get there in December. Who knows? Maybe it's January or February, but we'll just start all over again and start doing them month after month.
Yeah, and I really do believe this is the right thing to be doing, to get out from behind our keyboards and let our readers ask of us what they would like beyond what is possible in a discussed commentary. And I really enjoy it because they ask questions that make me think. And they're hungry to hear that. I really do believe this. And Glenn Beck said this at the beginning of the Tea Party or the Rochester the 912 movement. People who are surrounded by the Democrat socialist liberals, they want to know that they're not alone. If you remember how we felt when we went out to Keene and how happy they were that somebody even bothered to come out, it told me we're doing the right thing. And it's unusual. There are other blog sites like Red State, The Resurgent. They have one big bash a year. We're trying to do a lot of them because, New Hampshire's relatively small and we got readers all over.
Yeah, and we don't have their budget.
Well, this is true, too.
Not yet. Not yet. Maybe we will.
If you happen to run a conservative company and you know who our demographics are, we would be happy to accept your sponsorship or your ads to display on all kinds of things. Or even if you wanted to support or be a sponsor of Grok Talk, contact me at skip@granickrock.com or steve@granickrock.com. We will hook you up.
We will. And the website is granickrock.com. We are Grok Talk. We have come to the end of our second. That's 2. And I'm calling this version 3 because this is the 3rd iteration of the show that actually has the name Grok Talk. So when you see the file,
fourth iteration.
It's your 4th iteration of audio, but it wasn't Grok Talk. It was Meet the New Press. So that's the way it's going to go. Anyway, we are done for the week. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll have an audio version and a video version of this program, and we will continue to work on the quality of the content and the presentation. The lighting obviously is a little weird for all 3 of us, but once again, we're just kind of low budget winging it, right? It's the content, it's the topic, it's the discussion, it's the introspection, it's all that good stuff, and that's what we're here for.
Your camera's not doing you justice. I was trying to use the screen of the iPad to cast a little extra light on me. It just looked weird. So, yeah, I got one little parting shot. So we noted the departure of Kirsten Gillibrand. Did anybody look at the union leader yesterday? I know we have more readers than they do, but in the opinion section, there was a woman writing the wondrous qualities of Kirsten Gillibrand and how instead of reserving her judgment to later in the primary, she was all in for Gillibrand because she was the best possible challenger to Trump, would make a wonderful president. And in the afternoon, we get the announcement that Gillibrand is no more. I just thought the irony was perfect. Well, the judgment of some of these folks is maybe a little lacking.
Hey, she was the last one to get a ticket on the Titanic.
Yeah.
You got that many candidates. They're all eventually going to drop out. So you got to pick somebody and back them and support them. And, we've picked people and been like, oh, well, that didn't work out. So, all right, our hour's up, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We will do this again next week, some night during the week, and we will post it on Saturday morning. So thank you very much.
All right, take care. Good night, folks.
Good night.
Good night.
Excellent.
Rock